The arena was alive. 20,000 people screaming my name, the bass from the speakers vibrating through my chest, the smell of popcorn and sweat mixing with the sharp scent of polished hardwood. This was Game 4 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. We were up 2-1, and the energy in that building felt like electricity running through my veins. I lived for nights like this. Nights when the lights were brightest, when every possession mattered, when I could silence the world and just play. I was having the game of my life. 28 points in the third quarter alone. My shot was falling from everywhere. Deep threes, pull-up jumpers, drives to the basket where I finished through contact like I was made of something stronger than bone and muscle. The crowd was chanting my name during free throws. My teammates were feeding off my energy, playing with a confidence that felt unbreakable. Coach had that rare smile on his face, the one he only showed when everything was clicking exactly the way he drew it up. I caught the ball at the top of the key with 4 minutes left in the third. My defender was already backpedaling, afraid of my speed. I could see the fear in his eyes. That's when you know you own the night. I sized him up, crossed over twice, and exploded to my right. The lane opened up like the Red Sea. I went up for the layup, absorbed the contact, and watched the ball kiss off the glass and drop through. The whistle blew, and won. The building erupted. As I walked to the free throw line, flexing my arms and soaking in the roar, I let my eyes drift over the crowd like I always did. I loved seeing their faces, the kids in jerseys with my number, the fathers holding up their phones to capture the moment, the women screaming like I was a rock star. It was validation, proof that all the hours in the gym, all the sacrifices, all the pain, it meant something. That's when I saw her. Courtside, third row, right behind our bench. Melissa. My heart stopped. Not the good kind of stop, like when you hit a game winner. The bad kind. The kind that makes your chest tighten and your stomach drop like you just got punched. She was wearing a black dress, her hair pulled back in a way I used to love, and her hands were resting on her stomach. Her very round, very pregnant stomach. I hadn't seen her in 8 months, not since the night she told me she couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't handle the pressure, the travel, the women who threw themselves at me in every city, the constant media attention. She said she needed a normal life, someone who could be present, someone who wasn't married to basketball. I begged her to stay. I told her I'd change, that I'd make more time, that she was the only one who mattered. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said she didn't believe me. And now she was here, pregnant, at my game, staring at me like she had something to say but couldn't find the words. I missed the free throw. First one I'd missed all night. The sound of the ball clanging off the back rim snapped me out of my shock, but my hands were shaking. I could feel my pulse in my throat. My teammate Marcus grabbed the rebound and brought the ball up the court, but I wasn't moving. I was frozen, staring at her. She wasn't looking away. Her eyes were locked on mine, and there was something in them I couldn't read. Guilt? Fear? Desperation? Coach called a timeout. I barely heard the whistle. Marcus had to grab my arm and pull me toward the bench. The noise of the arena felt distant now, like I was underwater. My teammates were huddled around Coach, listening to the play he was drawing up, but I couldn't focus. I looked back at Melissa. She was still watching me. Her hand moved to her stomach, protective, almost like she was shielding something. Or someone. Was it mine? The thought hit me like a freight train. The timing could line up. We broke up in February. It was October now. 8 months. My chest felt tight. I wanted to run over there, demand answers, ask her why she was here, why now, why like this. But I couldn't move. I was trapped in front of 20,000 people, expected to play, expected to perform, expected to be the man everyone believed I was. Coach slapped my shoulder. You good? I nodded, but I wasn't good. Nothing about this was good. The timeout ended. We went back on the court. I tried to shake it off, tried to get back into the rhythm, but my legs felt heavy. My mind was racing. Every time I touched the ball, I could feel her eyes on me. I turned the ball over twice in the span of 3 possessions. Careless passes, sloppy handles. The crowd that had been worshiping me 10 minutes ago was now groaning in frustration. Coach yanked me out of the game with 2 minutes left in the third and put his hand on my chest as I sat down. "What's going on with you?" he asked, his voice low and firm. I couldn't answer. I just shook my head and grabbed a towel, wiping the sweat from my face even though I felt cold. I looked back at Melissa. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was talking to someone next to her, a man in a dark suit. He didn't look like a fan. He looked official, too serious, too focused. The fourth quarter started without me. Coach kept me on the bench, and I watched as our lead started to slip. 5 points became 3. 3 became 1. The other team was surging, feeding off our confusion, off my absence. My teammates kept glancing at me, wondering what was wrong, why their best player was sitting when the game was on the line. I wanted to go back in, wanted to fix this, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My mind was stuck on her, on that stomach, on the man in the suit. With 6 minutes left in the game, the man stood up. He leaned over and said something to Melissa. She nodded, her face pale. Then he pulled out a badge. Even from the bench, I could see it. The 3 letters that make your blood run cold. FBI. The arena seemed to tilt. I watched as 2 more agents appeared from the tunnel, walking quickly toward the court. Security guards were moving, confused, trying to figure out what was happening. The referees blew their whistles, stopping the game. Players on both teams froze, looking around, trying to understand why the game had been interrupted. The agents walked straight toward our bench, straight toward me. I stood up, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode. My teammates backed away, creating space, their faces full of shock and confusion. Coach stepped forward, trying to block the agents, demanding to know what was going on. But they didn't stop. One of them, a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes like steel, held up her badge and said 5 words that shattered my entire world. "We need to speak with you." The cameras were on me. The crowd was silent, the kind of silence that only happens when something terrible is unfolding. I could see the shock on people's faces, the phones being raised to record every second. This wasn't just a private moment anymore. This was public. This was permanent. I looked at Melissa. She was crying now, her hand covering her mouth. The man in the suit was standing next to her, his expression unreadable. I wanted to scream at her, to demand to know what she had done, what this was about, but I couldn't speak. My voice was gone. The agents didn't touch me, but they didn't need to. Their presence was enough. One of them gestured toward the tunnel. "Please come with us," the woman said. Her tone was polite but firm, not a request, a command. I looked at Coach. He looked helpless, older than I'd ever seen him, his mouth opening and closing like he didn't know what to say. Marcus stepped forward, his hand on my shoulder, but I shook my head. There was nothing he could do. There was nothing anyone could do. I walked toward the tunnel, flanked by federal agents, while 20,000 people watched in stunned silence. The game had stopped. My life had stopped. I could hear the murmur rising behind me, the confusion, the speculation, the beginning of a story that would dominate every headline by morning. As I passed Melissa, I looked at her one more time. She mouthed something I couldn't hear. Maybe it was, "I'm sorry." Maybe it was something else. It didn't matter. Whatever we had, whatever we could have been, it was over now. She had brought the storm to my doorstep, and I didn't even know why. The tunnel was cold and dim compared to the bright lights of the arena. The agents walked on either side of me, silent and professional. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and uneven. My hands were shaking. My mind was spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. What had I done? What did they think I'd done? Was this about taxes, contracts, something my agent handled that I didn't know about? Or was it about Melissa? About the baby? About something I couldn't even imagine? We reached a small office beneath the arena, the kind of room where team staff usually review game footage or handle logistics. The agents closed the door behind us. The woman sat down across from me, her hands folded on the table. The other agent, a younger man with a buzz cut and an expression that gave nothing away, stood by the door. "Do you know why we're here?" the woman asked. I shook my head. My throat was too dry to speak. She opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of my agent, Richard Carver, the man who had represented me since I entered the league. The man who negotiated my contracts, managed my endorsements, told me which opportunities to take and which to ignore. The man I trusted with my entire career. "Do you know this man?" she asked. "That's my agent," I said, my voice hoarse. "Rich. What about him?" She slid another photograph across the table. This one was of Melissa and Rich, together, in what looked like a hotel lobby. They were standing close, too close, talking in a way that looked intimate. My stomach turned. "When was the last time you spoke to Mr. Carver?" she asked. "Yesterday," I said, my mind struggling to keep up. "He called me about an endorsement deal." "Why? What's going on?" The woman leaned back in her chair, studying me like I was a puzzle she was trying to solve. "Mr. Carver is under investigation for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit sports betting fraud. We have evidence that he's been using confidential information obtained from his clients, including you, to manipulate betting markets and profit from insider knowledge." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. Rich? My agent? The man who sat with me at my mother's kitchen table when I was 19 and told me he'd take care of everything? "That's impossible," I said, shaking my head. "Rich wouldn't do that. He's been with me since day one." "We have bank records, Mr. Hayes," she said, using my last name in a way that made this feel even more real. "We have communications. We have testimony from associates who worked with him. And we have reason to believe that Ms. Reyes," she gestured to the photo of Melissa, "was involved in facilitating some of these transactions." The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "Melissa? Involved? The woman I loved? The woman I thought I knew? Was working with my agent to destroy my career? I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What does this have to do with me?" The woman's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained hard. "We're trying to determine the extent of your knowledge and involvement. Right now, you're a witness, but depending on what we find, that could change. A witness, or a suspect." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I thought about the contracts Rich had handled, the investments he'd recommended, the accounts he managed. How much of my money had been used in whatever scheme he was running? How deep did this go? "I didn't know," I said, my voice breaking. "I swear to God I didn't know anything about this." She nodded slowly. "That's what we're here to find out." The door opened, and another agent stepped in, whispering something to the woman. She stood up, gathering her folder. "We'll need you to come downtown for a full interview. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Bring a lawyer." Bring a lawyer. The words echoed in my head. I'd never needed a lawyer for anything in my life. I played basketball. I signed autographs. I did commercials for sneakers. I wasn't a criminal. But as I sat there in that cold, sterile room beneath the arena where I'd just been a hero, I realized that none of that mattered anymore. My life had been turned inside out in a matter of minutes, and I didn't even know who had done it or why. The agents left me alone for a moment. I sat there, staring at the photographs on the table, Melissa's face, Rich's smug smile. I thought about all the times Rich had told me to trust him, to let him handle the business side while I focused on the game. I thought about Melissa telling me she couldn't handle my life, that she needed something simpler, something real. Had any of it been real? Or had I been a fool this entire time, blind to the people using me, profiting off me, destroying me from the inside out? My phone buzzed. I pulled it out, my hands still shaking. 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, social media notifications exploding. The video was already everywhere. Federal agents escorting me off the court, my face frozen in shock. The headlines were writing themselves. NBA star questioned by FBI during playoff game. Basketball phenom linked to federal investigation. Scandal rocks championship run. I turned off my phone. I couldn't look anymore. I couldn't breathe. I stood up and walked to the small window in the room. Through the glass, I could see a sliver of the parking lot. News vans were already pulling up, satellite dishes rising into the night sky like vultures circling a carcass. This was my life now. Not the cheers, not the glory, not the game I loved. This, scandal, suspicion, betrayal. And somewhere out there, Melissa was carrying a child. Maybe my child. Maybe the only real thing left in this nightmare. Or maybe just another lie. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flash of cameras, the stunned faces in the crowd, Melissa's hand on her stomach. I saw Rich's photograph on that table, his smile that I'd always thought meant he had my back. Now it looked predatory, like he'd been laughing at me this whole time. My apartment felt different when I got home. The penthouse that had always represented everything I'd achieved, everything I'd worked for, now felt like a cage. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, custom furniture, a trophy case that gleamed under recessed lighting. It all felt hollow, meaningless. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, still wearing my warm-up gear, and tried to make sense of what had happened. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing even though I'd turned off notifications. I finally powered it down completely and threw it across the room. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It gave me space to think, and thinking was the last thing I wanted to do. Around 3 in the morning, I walked to the window and looked down at the street below. There were still news vans parked outside my building. I could see reporters doing stand-ups under the streetlights, their breath visible in the October cold. They were telling my story, Or what they thought was my story. They didn't know anything. Hell, I didn't know anything. I thought about calling my mother. She'd be awake by now, 5 hours ahead in North Carolina, probably watching the news, seeing her son's face plastered across every channel. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't hear the worry in her voice, the fear that everything she'd sacrificed to get me here had been for nothing. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep me in basketball camps. She'd driven me to tournaments 4 hours away in a car that barely ran. She'd believed in me when nobody else did. And now this. By the time the sun came up, I still hadn't moved from that window. The city was waking up around me, people heading to work, living their normal lives, unaware that mine had imploded. I watched a man walking his dog, a woman jogging past, a delivery truck making its early rounds. I envied them. Their problems were probably real, but manageable. Bills to pay, relationships to navigate, jobs to show up to. My problems had become national news overnight. At 7 a.m., there was a knock on my door. I froze. The FBI? More reporters who'd somehow gotten past security? I approached slowly, looking through the peephole. It was Marcus, my teammate, holding 2 coffee cups and a paper bag that probably contained breakfast I wouldn't be able to eat. I opened the door. He took one look at me and shook his head. "Man, you look like hell." "Feel like it too," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He set the coffee and food on the kitchen counter and turned to face me. Marcus had been my teammate for 3 years. We'd been through playoff battles together, celebrated victories, endured losses. He was one of the few guys in the league I actually trusted. Right now, seeing concern on his face instead of judgment felt like the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. "The whole team's talking," he said. "Nobody knows what to believe. Social media's going crazy. They're saying everything from tax evasion to point shaving to drug trafficking." I laughed, but it came out bitter. I don't even know what they actually think I did, or what Rich did, or what Melissa was part of. It's all just words right now. Federal investigation, wire fraud, money laundering. It doesn't feel real. "You got a lawyer?" Marcus asked. "Meeting with one at 8:30. Then I'm supposed to be downtown by 9 for the formal interview. You want me to come with you?" The offer surprised me. Marcus had his own life, his own career to protect. Being seen with me right now could damage his reputation too. Guilt by association. But he was offering anyway. "Nah," I said. "But thanks. I appreciate you coming by." He nodded, then pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was a text thread, our team group chat. I'd been too afraid to look at my own phone, but here it was, spelled out in brutal clarity. Half the team was defending me, saying there was no way I'd be involved in something criminal. The other half was silent, which felt worse than outright accusation. Silence meant doubt. Silence meant they were protecting themselves, distancing, waiting to see which way this would fall before committing to an opinion. "Coach sent a message this morning," Marcus said, scrolling to show me. "He said the organization is conducting its own investigation. They've suspended you from team activities pending the outcome." Suspended. The word hit me harder than I expected. I'd never been suspended for anything in my life. Not in high school, not in college, not in 7 years as a professional. I'd been the guy who showed up early, stayed late, did everything right, and now I was suspended because my agent was a criminal and my ex-girlfriend had apparently helped him. "The game last night," I said. "We lose?" Marcus nodded. "By 12. Fell apart in the 4th without you. Coach tried to rally us, but the whole arena was distracted. People were talking about what happened more than they were watching the game. Series is tied now, 2-2. Another wave of guilt crashed over me. My team had needed me, and I'd been dragged away by federal agents. Our playoff run, our championship hopes, everything we'd worked for all season was now in jeopardy because of something I didn't even understand. Marcus stayed for another 20 minutes, mostly just sitting with me in silence. Sometimes that's what you need. Not advice or reassurance or empty platitudes, just someone willing to be present while your world burns down. When he left, he gripped my shoulder and told me to call him if I needed anything. I watched him walk out, wondering if that would be the last time one of my teammates treated me like a friend instead of a liability. At 8:30, I met with the lawyer the team had recommended. His name was David Brennan, a sharp-dressed man in his 50s with gray temples and the kind of confidence that comes from winning battles in courtrooms. We met at his office downtown, a glass tower that smelled like expensive cologne and leather furniture. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Tell me everything," he said, opening a legal pad. "Start from when you first met Richard Carver." I told him. All of it. How Rich had approached me during my junior year of college, promising he'd get me a top 10 draft pick, a shoe deal, endorsements that would set me up for life. How he'd delivered on every promise. How he'd become more than an agent, a mentor, someone I called when I was struggling, when I needed advice, when I didn't know who else to trust. Brennan took notes, his expression unreadable. Did you ever review your financial statements personally? Not really, I admitted. Rich handled all that. He'd send me quarterly reports, but I just trusted the numbers were right. I was focused on basketball. Did he ever ask you for information about team strategies, injury reports, anything that could be considered insider knowledge? I thought about it. Sometimes. He'd ask how I was feeling physically, if any guys were playing hurt. Said it was so he could negotiate better contracts, understand the market value. I didn't think anything of it. Brennan's pen stopped moving. He looked at me over his glasses. That information could be used to manipulate betting lines. If someone knows a star player is injured before the public does, they can place significant bets before the odds adjust. My stomach dropped. All those casual conversations, those questions I'd thought were just Rich being thorough, had been him mining me for information to use in his scheme. I'd been the source without even knowing it. What about Melissa Reyes? Brennan asked. Hearing her name out loud made my chest tighten. We dated for 2 years. Broke up 8 months ago. I haven't spoken to her since. Did she ever meet with Richard Carver? A few times, I guess. Team events, parties. She knew him. But I didn't think they were close or anything. Brennan wrote something down. The FBI mentioned she was involved in facilitating transactions. That suggests she wasn't just a passive observer. She may have been actively helping him move money or communicate with other parties involved. The image of Melissa and Rich standing close in that hotel lobby flashed through my mind. How long had that been going on? Had they been working together the entire time we were dating? Had she been with me just to get close to my finances, my information, my career? There's something else, I said, my voice barely steady. She's pregnant. She showed up courtside last night. That's when I saw her for the first time since we broke up. Brennan looked up sharply. Is it yours? I don't know. The timing could work, but I don't know anything anymore. He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Here's what you need to understand. The FBI doesn't drag someone off a court during a nationally televised game unless they have significant evidence and they're trying to make a statement. They could have approached you discreetly, but they chose spectacle. That means they want pressure on you, on Carver, on everyone involved. They want people scared enough to cooperate. I don't have anything to cooperate with, I said. I didn't know about any of this. That may be true, Brennan said, but proving it is another matter. If your money was used in this scheme, even unknowingly, you could face civil liability. If they find any evidence that you had knowledge or should have had knowledge, you could face criminal charges. We need to be very careful in this interview. Answer only what they ask. Don't volunteer information. And if at any point I tell you not to answer, you stop talking immediately. Understood? I nodded, feeling like I was preparing for war instead of a conversation. We arrived at the FBI field office at 8:50. The building was nondescript. Gray concrete and tinted windows, the kind of place you drive past every day without noticing. Brennan and I were escorted through security, past offices where agents worked at computers, down a hallway that felt longer than it should have, and into a small conference room with a table, 4 chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner. The woman from last night was already there. Special Agent Linda Morrison. She introduced herself formally this time, along with her partner, Special Agent Derek Chang. They were polite but cold, the kind of professional detachment that makes you feel guilty even when you're not. Thank you for coming in, Morrison said, gesturing for us to sit. We appreciate your cooperation. Brennan didn't smile. My client is here voluntarily to assist in your investigation. He has no knowledge of any criminal activity and is as surprised by these allegations as anyone. Morrison nodded, opening a folder identical to the one from last night. Mr. Hayes, how long has Richard Carver been your agent? 7 years, I said, since before the draft. And in that time, would you say you had a close relationship? Yes, I trusted him completely. Did he have access to your financial accounts? I glanced at Brennan, who gave a slight nod. He managed most of my finances. Investments, endorsements, contracts. That was his job. Were you aware that Mr. Carver had opened several offshore accounts in your name? My blood ran cold. No, I didn't know that. Morrison slid a document across the table. Bank statements from accounts I'd never seen. My name was on them, along with transactions moving hundreds of thousands of dollars in and out. Dates, amounts, routing numbers. It looked official. It looked real. and I had no idea any of it existed. These accounts were used to receive payments from a sports betting syndicate, Chang said, speaking for the first time. His voice was flat, factual. The syndicate would provide capital to Mr. Carver, who would then use insider information to place bets with favorable odds. The profits were laundered through these accounts and others. I stared at the documents, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I never authorized these accounts. I never saw any of this money. The question isn't whether you saw the money, Morrison said. The question is whether you provided the information that made it possible. Brennan leaned forward. My client has already stated he had casual conversations with Mr. Carver about team matters, which is standard practice between athletes and their representatives. That doesn't constitute conspiracy or knowing participation in fraud. Perhaps not, Morrison said. But we need to establish the extent of his knowledge. Mr. Hayes, did you ever discuss game strategies with Mr. Carver? Injury information? Anything that could be considered non-public information? I thought about every conversation we'd ever had. Rich asking how my knee felt after a hard game, asking if the starting point guard was really okay after that ankle sprain or if he was playing hurt, asking what the coach's game plan was for the next opponent. At the time, it all seemed normal. Now it felt like a trap I'd walked into willingly. Sometimes, I admitted, but I thought he just wanted to stay informed. I didn't think he was using it for anything illegal. Morrison pulled out another photograph. This one was more recent. Melissa and Rich, sitting in a car together. The angle suggested it was taken by surveillance. Do you know when this photo was taken? I looked at the timestamp. 3 weeks ago. Long after Melissa and I had broken up. Long after she'd told me she couldn't be part of my life anymore. No, I said quietly. We believe Ms. Reyes was acting as a courier, Chang said. Moving cash, delivering messages, facilitating meetings between Mr. Carver and other members of the organization. We've traced several transactions directly to her accounts. I couldn't breathe. Melissa hadn't just known about this. She'd been part of it, an active participant. And all those months we were together, when I thought we were building something real, she'd been using me, gathering information, setting me up. Did she ever ask you about games? Morrison asked. About your performance, your teammates, upcoming matchups? I thought back. Of course she had. What girlfriend wouldn't ask about her boyfriend's job? But now every question took on new meaning. When she asked if I was nervous about a big game, was she really concerned? Or was she gathering intelligence for Rich? When she asked about injuries or coaching decisions, was that genuine interest or calculated extraction? Yes, I said, my voice hollow. But she was my girlfriend. I thought she cared. Morrison's expression softened slightly, the first hint of humanity I'd seen from her. I understand this is difficult, but we need you to be completely honest with us. Is there any possibility the child she's carrying is yours? The question hung in the air like poison. I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe that she'd moved on completely, that the baby had nothing to do with me, that I could walk away from this entire nightmare clean, but I couldn't. It's possible, I said. The timing works. Brennan wrote something on his legal pad and slid it toward me. Don't volunteer anything about paternity. We'll handle that separately. Morrison closed her folder. Here's where we are. Richard Carver is facing multiple federal charges. We have enough evidence to convict him regardless of your cooperation. Melissa Reyes is also facing charges, though the extent of her involvement is still being determined. You, Mr. Hayes, are in a complicated position. We don't believe you were the architect of this scheme, but we need to determine whether you were a willing participant, a negligent party, or a victim. He's a victim, Brennan said firmly. Maybe, Morrison said, but the accounts are in his name. The information came from him. Prosecutors could argue he should have known what was happening with his own finances. A jury might not be sympathetic to a millionaire athlete who claims he was too busy to pay attention. The threat was clear. They could charge me if they wanted to. They could destroy what was left of my career, my reputation, everything. Or I could help them build their case against Rich and Melissa. What do you want from me? I asked. Full cooperation, Chang said. Every conversation you remember with Carver, every question Melissa asked, every detail, no matter how small. We need to build a timeline and establish the flow of information. If you do that, and if your story holds up, we can make a strong case that you were used without your knowledge. Brennan's hand touched my arm, a warning, but I was tired of being careful. I was tired of protecting people who destroyed me. I'll tell you everything, I said, but I want something in exchange. Morrison raised an eyebrow. You're not exactly in a position to negotiate. I want to know about the baby, I said. I want a paternity test. If that child is mine, I need to know. I need to be able to protect them from whatever mess their mother created. Morrison and Chang exchanged a glance. We can arrange that, Morrison said, but Ms. Reyes will have to consent. Then make her consent, I said, anger breaking through the numbness for the first time. You said she's facing charges. Tell her if she wants any consideration, any chance at a deal, she has to cooperate with this. I deserve to know if I'm about to be a father. Brennan squeezed my arm harder, but I didn't care. For 8 months, I'd carried the weight of that breakup, wondering what I'd done wrong, how I could have fixed it. Now I knew the truth. There was nothing to fix. It had been a lie from the beginning, but if there was a child, that child was innocent in all of this. And I'd be damned if I let Rich and Melissa destroy that kid's life the way they'd destroyed mine. Morrison nodded slowly. We'll see what we can do. The interview lasted another 3 hours. They asked me about every conversation with Rich I could remember, every meeting, every phone call. They showed me more documents, more photographs, more evidence of a conspiracy I'd been living inside without seeing. By the time we walked out of that building, my head was pounding and my body felt like I'd played 4 games back to back. Brennan walked me to my car in the underground garage. You did well in there, he said. They believe you didn't know. That's good. But the civil liability is still a concern. If they seize those offshore accounts as proceeds from crime, you could be on the hook to repay the money, even though you never touched it. How much are we talking? Millions. Potentially tens of millions. I leaned against my car, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath me. I don't have that kind of liquid cash. Most of my money's tied up in investments, property, the endorsement deals Rich negotiated, which may also be compromised if they were part of the scheme, Brennan said. We'll need forensic accountants to go through everything. It's going to be expensive and time-consuming. I don't care what it costs, I said. I want to know where every dollar went. I want to know how much of my life was real and how much was a con. Brennan nodded. I'll start making calls. In the meantime, avoid the media. Don't post on social media. Don't talk to teammates about the case. And if Melissa tries to contact you, don't respond. Let everything go through me. I drove home in a daze, barely aware of the traffic around me. When I got back to my apartment, the news vans were still there, multiplied now. A small army of reporters waiting for me to emerge and give them a sound bite they could turn into a headline. I parked in the underground garage and took the service elevator up, avoiding the lobby. When I stepped into my apartment, the silence felt suffocating. I walked to the bedroom and finally turned my phone back on. It took 5 minutes for all the notifications to load. Messages from teammates, from friends, from people I hadn't talked to in years, suddenly reaching out now that I was famous for the wrong reasons. One message stood out. From an unknown number. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Please call me. We need to talk about the baby. Melissa. I stared at those words until they blurred. Part of me wanted to call her, to scream at her, to demand answers. Part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend I'd never seen it. But I couldn't do either. Because buried in that text was the one thing I couldn't ignore. The baby. If that child was mine, everything changed. I couldn't just walk away. Couldn't just rebuild my life and forget. I'd be connected to Melissa forever, tied to the woman who'd helped destroy me, bound by biology to a future I couldn't control. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding my phone, and felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid. Before basketball, before fame, before any of this. Completely and utterly alone. 3 days passed like a slow-motion car crash. I stayed in my apartment, curtains drawn, watching my life unraveling on every news channel. The talking heads had their theories. Some said I was a mastermind who'd gotten greedy. Others said I was a fool who'd been manipulated. A few defended me, saying there was no evidence I'd done anything wrong. But their voices were drowned out by the louder, angrier chorus demanding answers, justice, my head on a platter. The team released a statement. Professional, measured, completely devoid of actual support. They were cooperating with investigators. They took integrity seriously. They were confident the truth would emerge. Translation: we're protecting the organization and you're on your own. My endorsement deals started falling like dominoes. The sneaker company suspended my signature line pending the investigation. The sports drink pulled my commercials. The watch brand issued a statement about their commitment to ethical partnerships. Only one company stood by me, a small tech startup that had signed me 6 months ago for basically nothing. Their CEO sent me a personal message saying they believed in my character and wouldn't abandon me over allegations. It should have meant something, but it just made me feel more pathetic. The only people who believed in me were the ones with nothing to lose. Marcus came by every day, bringing food I barely touched and sitting with me through the worst of it. He didn't try to fix anything or offer hollow reassurance. He just stayed. On the third night, we sat on my balcony in the cold October air, watching the city lights blur together. "Coach is asking about you," Marcus said. "Wants to know when you'll be ready to talk." "What's there to talk about?" I asked. "I'm suspended. They don't want me around the team. I'm a distraction." "You're still part of this team," Marcus said, "and we need you. We lost Game 5 last night. Down 3-2 in the series now. One more loss and our season's over." The guilt hit me fresh. While I'd been hiding in my apartment, my teammates had been fighting without me, losing without me. Everything we'd worked for all season, gone because I'd been too stupid to see the knife coming for my back. "I can't help you," I said. "Even if they lifted the suspension tomorrow, I can't focus. My head's not in the game. It's in offshore bank accounts and FBI interviews, and trying to figure out if I'm about to be a father to a child whose mother helped destroy my life." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that cut deeper than any headline. "You know what the guys are saying? They're saying you changed. That success got to you. That you stopped being one of us and started believing your own hype. They're saying maybe you did know about the money, maybe you got greedy and now you're playing victim." I turned to look at him, anger flaring hot in my chest. "You believe that?" "No," he said firmly. "I know you. I've seen how you carry yourself, how you treat people, how hard you work. But not everyone knows you like I do. And right now, silence looks like guilt. You need to tell your story. Not to the FBI or your lawyer or the media. To the team. To the guys who've been in that locker room with you for years. They deserve to hear it from you." He was right. I'd been so focused on protecting myself legally that I'd forgotten about the relationships that actually mattered. My teammates weren't the enemy. They were confused, hurt, feeling betrayed just like I was. If I didn't give them the truth, someone else would fill the void with lies. "Set up a meeting," I said. "Tomorrow. I'll talk to them." Marcus nodded, relief visible on his face. "Thank you. They need to hear from you." After he left, I sat alone with my thoughts until my phone buzzed. A text from Brennan. "FBI got consent for paternity test." Melissa agreed. "Lab will contact you tomorrow to schedule blood draw. Results in 3 to 5 days. 3 to 5 days until I knew if my life was about to get infinitely more complicated. 3 to 5 days wondering if I'd be connected forever to a woman who'd used me as a pawn in someone else's game. I should have felt relief that I'd finally get answers. Instead, I just felt numb. I pulled up Melissa's text from 3 days ago, the one I'd been ignoring. My thumb hovered over the call button. What would I even say to her? What could she possibly say to me that would make any of this make sense? But I needed to hear her voice. Needed to understand how someone I'd loved could do this. I pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. It rang twice before she answered. "Hello?" Her voice was small, fragile, nothing like the confident woman I'd known. "It's me," I said. "We need to talk." Silence. Then a shaky breath. "Thank you for calling. I didn't think you would." "I shouldn't be," I said. "My lawyer would lose his mind if he knew. But I need answers, Melissa. I need you to tell me the truth. All of it." "Not over the phone," she said quickly. "Can we meet? Somewhere private?" Every instinct screamed not to. Meeting her was dangerous, stupid, exactly what Brennan had told me not to do. But I was tired of getting information filtered through lawyers and FBI agents. I wanted to look her in the eye when she explained how she'd destroyed me. "Where?" I asked. She gave me an address. A coffee shop in a quiet neighborhood across town. The kind of place where nobody would recognize us. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Please." I hung up without agreeing, but we both knew I'd be there. That night, I barely slept again. I kept running through scenarios in my head. Things I wanted to say to her. Accusations I wanted to hurl. Questions I needed answered. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted but wired, running on anger and caffeine and the desperate need for clarity. I arrived at the coffee shop at 7:50, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses like some kind of celebrity cliche trying not to be recognized. The place was nearly empty. An old man reading a newspaper in the corner, a woman on her laptop, and Melissa sitting at a table in the back, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her pregnant belly visible even beneath the loose sweater she wore. I slid into the seat across from her. She looked up, and I saw that she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. Good. She should be crying. She should feel 1% of the pain she'd caused me. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Don't thank me, I said, my voice harder than I intended. Just talk. Tell me everything. And if you lie to me even once, I walk out and you never hear from me again. She nodded, gripping her mug tighter. I didn't know it would go this far. I swear, when it started, I thought it was harmless. When what started? Rich approached me about a year into our relationship, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, it was just small things. He'd ask me what you'd told me about games, about how you were feeling, about the team. He said it helped him negotiate better deals for you, understand the market. I believed him. And then? Then it got bigger. He started asking more specific questions. Injury reports, coaching strategies, who was playing hurt. He said it gave him an edge in negotiations that other agents did the same thing. I still didn't think it was wrong. I thought I was helping you. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe that she'd been naive and manipulated just like me. But the FBI had photos of her in that car with Rich, evidence of transactions flowing through her accounts. That wasn't naivety. That was participation. When did you figure out what he was really doing? I asked. She looked down at her mug. About 6 months ago. I saw messages on his phone. Betting syndicates. Offshore accounts. Amounts of money that didn't make sense. I confronted him, told him I wanted out. And? He said it was too late. That I was already involved, that my name was on documents, that if he went down, I'd go down with him. He said the only way to protect myself was to keep going, to help him finish what he'd started, and then we could all walk away clean. So you stayed, I said, disgust thick in my voice. You kept feeding him information. You kept using me. I was scared, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks now. He threatened me. Said if I told you or went to the authorities, he'd make sure I took the fall for everything. I didn't know what to do. You could have told me, I said, slamming my hand on the table hard enough to make her jump. You could have come to me and we could have figured it out together. Instead, you broke up with me, disappeared, and kept working with the man who was destroying my life. I broke up with you to protect you, she said, her voice breaking. I thought if I wasn't around, if we weren't together, maybe Rich would leave you alone. Maybe he'd find someone else to use. I thought I was saving you. You weren't saving me, I said. You were saving yourself. And you know what the worst part is? I believed you. When you said you couldn't handle my life, that you needed something normal, I blamed myself. I thought I'd failed you. I spent 8 months wondering what I could have done differently. And the whole time, you were working with Rich, setting me up, feeding him information so he could bet against my own team. I never bet against you, she said desperately. I swear, I never wanted you to lose. The information wasn't always about you. Sometimes it was about other teams, other players. Rich had clients all over the league. That doesn't make it better, I said. It makes it worse. You helped him corrupt the entire sport. Do you understand what you've done? It's not just my career that's destroyed. It's the integrity of the game. Every fan who watches now will wonder if it's real or rigged. Every player will be under suspicion. You and Rich didn't just hurt me. You hurt basketball. She was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. The woman with the laptop glanced over, concerned. I lowered my voice, trying to keep this from becoming a scene. The baby, I said. Is it mine? She nodded, unable to speak through the tears. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Part of me had been hoping she'd say no, that it was someone else's, that I could walk away from this completely. But deep down, I'd known. The timing, the way she'd shown up courtside, the desperation in her eyes. She'd come to tell me, maybe to ask for help, maybe just to unload the guilt before the FBI closed in. How far along are you? 7 months, she said. It's a girl. A girl. I was going to have a daughter whose mother had committed federal crimes, a daughter who'd grow up knowing her parents' story was a national scandal, a daughter I'd never planned for, never prepared for, but who was coming whether I was ready or not. Why did you show up at the game? I asked. Why then? I wanted to tell you before everything came out, she said. I knew the FBI was closing in. Rich told me they'd contacted him, that it was only a matter of time. I thought if I could tell you in person, if you could see that I was pregnant, maybe you'd understand why I did what I did, why I was so scared. Using our daughter as a shield, I said bitterly. Nice. That's not fair, she said, anger flashing in her eyes for the first time. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but everything I did because I was trapped. Rich manipulated both of us. He used your trust and my fear. He's the villain here, not me. You're not the villain, I said. But you're not innocent either. You made choices. You could have gone to the police. You could have told me. You could have done 100 things differently. But you chose to protect yourself first, and now we're both paying for it. She wiped her eyes with a napkin, trying to compose herself. What happens now? Now we wait for the paternity test to confirm what we already know, I said. Then we figure out custody, child support, all the legal stuff, separately, through lawyers. I'll support my daughter financially and emotionally. But you and me, we're done. Forever. I understand, she said quietly. Do you? I asked. Because I don't think you understand what you've taken from me. Basketball was my life. It was the only thing I was good at, the only thing that made sense. And you turned it into a crime scene. Every game I ever played, every win, every moment I thought was pure, is now tainted. People will always wonder if it was real or if Rich had his thumb on the scale. That's your legacy, Melissa. You didn't just destroy my career, you destroyed my passion. I stood up to leave, but she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. I'm sorry, she said, her voice desperate. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know you'll never forgive me. But I need you to know that I loved you. That was real. Everything else was lies and fear and terrible decisions. But what I felt for you was real. I pulled my hand away. It doesn't matter anymore. I walked out of that coffee shop and into the cold morning air. My phone was buzzing. A text from Marcus reminding me about the team meeting in 2 hours. I'd almost forgotten. Almost let the chaos with Melissa distract me from what mattered. But Marcus was right. I owed my teammates the truth. The team facility felt different when I walked in. Usually it was loud, full of energy and trash talk and the sounds of basketballs hitting hardwood. Today, it was quiet. Too quiet. I could feel eyes on me as I walked through the halls. Staff members who used to greet me warmly now looked away. The few people who did acknowledge me did so with pity, which felt worse than contempt. The locker room was full when I arrived. All my teammates sitting in their stalls waiting. Coach was there too, standing with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Marcus gave me a small nod of encouragement. I walked to the center of the room and stood there, feeling like I was on trial. I know you all have questions, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I know you've heard a lot of things in the media. I know some of you probably think I'm guilty. So I'm here to tell you the truth, and then you can decide for yourselves what to believe. Nobody said anything. They just waited. I didn't know about the money, I said. I didn't know about the betting, the offshore accounts, any of it. My agent, Rich Carver, was running a scheme behind my back. He used information I gave him in casual conversations to manipulate betting markets. He opened accounts in my name without my knowledge. He betrayed my trust completely. What kind of information? One of the younger guys asked. Injury reports, how guys were feeling physically, coaching strategies, things I thought he needed to know to do his job as my agent. I didn't realize he was using it for fraud. And your ex? Another teammate asked. She was involved too, right? I nodded. She was working with Rich. She's facing charges, but I didn't know about her involvement either until the FBI told me. We broke up 8 months ago and I haven't spoken to her since. Until today. That got their attention. Coach's eyes narrowed. You spoke to her today? She called and asked to meet, I said. I know I shouldn't have gone, but I needed answers. She told me she was scared, that Rich threatened her, that she didn't know how to get out. I don't know if I believe her, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that none of this is on you guys. None of this is on the team. This is my mess, my responsibility to clean up. But it does affect us, one of the veterans said, not unkindly. You're suspended. We're down 3-2 in the series. We might not make it past the second round because of this. I know, I said, and I'm sorry. If I could go back and pay more attention to my finances, vet my agent better, see through the lies, I would, but I can't. All I can do now is fight to clear my name and hope that when this is over, you'll still let me be part of this team. Coach stepped forward. The organization's still investigating. Until that's done, the suspension stands. But I want you to know something. I've coached you for 3 years. I've seen you at your best and your worst. And I don't believe you knowingly broke the rules. You're a lot of things, but you're not a cheater. The words hit me harder than I expected. Coach wasn't exactly known for sentimentality. For him to say that in front of the whole team meant everything. Thank you, Coach, I said, my voice thick. Marcus stood up. I believe him too, and until someone proves otherwise, he's still my teammate. Our teammate. We don't abandon each other just because things get hard. One by one, other guys stood up. Not all of them. Some stayed seated, doubt still visible on their faces. But enough stood that I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not that everything would be okay, not that my problems would disappear, but that I wasn't completely alone. The meeting broke up after that. Some guys came up to me offering support, telling me to stay strong. Others left quickly, avoiding eye contact. I understood. They had their own careers to protect, their own families to think about. I couldn't ask them to sacrifice their futures for mine. Marcus walked me out to the parking lot. That took guts, he said. Felt necessary, I said. They deserved the truth. What now? Now I wait, I said. Wait for the paternity test. Wait for the FBI to finish their investigation. Wait to see if I still have a career when this is over. You'll get through this, Marcus said. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you will. I wanted to believe him. But as I drove home, past the news vans that had become permanent fixtures outside my building, past the reporters shouting questions I couldn't answer, past the wreckage of the life I'd built, belief felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. That night, I got another text from Brennan. Forensic accountant's preliminary report. At least $8 million moved through accounts in your name. Civil liability exposure significant. We need to discuss settlement options with FBI. $8 million. Money I'd never seen, never touched, never known about. Money that Rich had stolen using my name, my reputation, my trust. And now, I might have to pay it back. I sat on my balcony again, looking out at the city that had once felt like mine. I'd come here 7 years ago with nothing but talent and dreams. I'd worked myself to exhaustion to prove I belonged. I'd earned every dollar, every accolade, every moment of success. And now it was all slipping away, taken by people I'd trusted, destroyed by decisions I'd never made. My phone buzzed one more time. A message from an unknown number. The paternity results came back early. She's yours. Congratulations, you're going to be a father. I read the message 3 times before it sank in. A daughter. My daughter. Coming into a world where her father was a scandal, her mother was a criminal, and the future was more uncertain than ever. But she was mine. And that meant something. It had to mean something. I didn't know how to fix the mess my life had become. I didn't know if I'd ever play basketball again, ever rebuild my reputation, ever trust anyone the way I'd trusted Rich and Melissa. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not let my daughter pay for our mistakes. Whatever it took, however long it took, I would make sure she had a better story than this, a better life than this, a better father than the one I was about to become. That was the only truth I had left to hold on to. The paternity results changed everything and nothing at the same time. I was going to be a father. That fact sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't put down, couldn't ignore, couldn't pretend didn't matter. But it didn't change the FBI investigation. It didn't change the fact that my career was in limbo. It didn't change the $8 million I supposedly owed for crimes I didn't commit. What it did change was my perspective. Suddenly, this wasn't just about me anymore. There was a little girl coming into the world in 2 months, and she deserved better than parents who were either in prison or broke from legal fees. She deserved stability, safety, a chance at a normal life, and I had no idea how to give her any of that. Brennan called the morning after I got the results. His voice was all business. No congratulations, no acknowledgement of what the news meant personally, just straight to the problem at hand. The FBI wants to make a deal, he said. Full cooperation in exchange for immunity from criminal prosecution. But the civil liability remains. You'd still be on the hook for restitution. How much are we talking? They're calculating now. Could be anywhere from 5 to 15 million, depending on how much money they can recover from Carver's accounts. The rest would come from you. 15 million. Most of my career earnings, gone. I'd be starting over from scratch, except I wouldn't really be starting over because I'd be doing it while raising a daughter and trying to rebuild a destroyed reputation. And if I don't take the deal, they could charge you as a co-conspirator. With your name on those accounts, a prosecutor could argue you had to know what was happening. It's a weak case, but it's a case. You'd be fighting it in court for years. Legal fees would bankrupt you anyway, and there's no guarantee you'd win. So my choices were, cooperate and lose everything financially, or fight and lose everything financially while also facing prison time. Some choice. Take the deal, I said. I'll figure out the money somehow. There's one more thing, Brennan said, his tone shifting slightly. Melissa's lawyer reached out. She wants to discuss custody arrangements before the baby's born. Apparently she's looking at a plea deal too, which might include jail time after the birth. She wants to make sure the baby has a plan. Jail time. Melissa was going to prison, and I was going to be a single father to a newborn. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. Set up the meeting, I said. Let's get it over with. The meeting happened 2 days later at Brennan's office. Melissa arrived with her lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Melissa looked worse than she had at the coffee shop. The pregnancy was taking its toll, or maybe it was the stress, the fear, the reality that her choices were about to cost her years of her life. We sat across from each other at a conference table, lawyers on either side like we were negotiating a business deal instead of discussing our daughter's future. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was exactly the kind of meeting I used to have with Rich, trusting him to handle the details while I focused on basketball. Look how that turned out. My client is prepared to sign over full custody, Patricia said, getting straight to it. Given her likely incarceration, she acknowledges that you're the best option for primary care of the child. How long? I asked, looking at Melissa. How long are you going to be gone? The plea deal is 3 to 5 years, she said quietly. With good behavior, maybe 2.5, but the baby will be in kindergarten by the time I get out. The weight of that settled over the room. This little girl was going to grow up without her mother for her earliest years. She'd learn to walk, talk, read, all without Melissa there. And it was all because of choices her mother made before she was even born. I want visitation rights, Melissa said, her voice stronger now. When I'm out, I want to be part of her life. That's reasonable, Brennan said before I could respond. We can outline a visitation schedule that begins upon your release, with terms that can be revisited as the child gets older. I wanted to argue. Part of me wanted to say she'd given up the right to be a mother when she committed federal crimes. But I thought about my daughter, about her growing up wondering why her mother wasn't around, about the questions she'd ask. She deserved to know Melissa, to have the chance to form her own opinion, to not grow up with a hole where her mother should be. Fine, I said, but I make all major decisions. Education, healthcare, where she lives. You get visitation, but I'm her parent. Melissa nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for her. We spent the next hour working out details. Child support, which Melissa obviously couldn't pay from prison but agreed to once she was released. Insurance, medical decisions, emergency contacts. It felt clinical and cold, nothing like the way I'd imagined planning for a child. But then again, nothing about this situation was what I'd imagined. As we were wrapping up, Melissa asked if she could speak to me alone. The lawyers exchanged glances but agreed to give us 5 minutes. They stepped out into the hallway, and suddenly it was just the two of us, sitting across from each other with the wreckage of our relationship between us. I know you hate me, she said. I know I destroyed your life, and you have every right to never forgive me. But I need you to know something. That baby, our daughter, she's the only good thing that came from us, the only pure thing that isn't tainted by what we did. What you did, I corrected. Not we. You and Rich. I didn't do anything except trust the wrong people. You're right, she said, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it. But please don't let her grow up thinking she was a mistake. Don't let her feel like she's the product of something ugly. She deserves better than that. She does deserve better, I agreed, which is why I'm going to make sure she has it. A good life, stability, love, everything you and I couldn't give each other. Melissa reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it across the table. These are letters, one for every birthday until she's 18. I wrote them in case something happens to me, or in case she doesn't want to see me when I get out. I want her to know that I loved her, even if I wasn't there. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. 17 letters. 17 years of birthdays that Melissa might miss entirely. It should have made me feel something, sympathy maybe, or sadness, but I just felt empty. I'll make sure she gets them, I said, when she's old enough to understand. Thank you. The lawyers came back in, and we signed the papers. Joint custody with me as primary guardian. Visitation rights for Melissa upon release. Child support terms. Medical decision authority. It was all there in black and white, legally binding, permanent. The end of one chapter, and the forced beginning of another. When I left Brennan's office, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the envelope full of letters. Part of me wanted to read them, to see what Melissa had written, what excuses or apologies or explanations she'd crafted for a daughter who didn't exist yet, but they weren't for me. They were for her. So I put them in my glove compartment and tried not to think about them. My phone rang. It was Coach. You got a minute? He asked. Yeah, what's up? Team lost last night. Season's over. Wanted you to hear it from me before you saw it on the news. The words hit harder than I expected. Our championship hopes, gone. All that work, All those games, all the sacrifices everyone made, finished because of a scandal that had nothing to do with basketball. I'm sorry, I said, inadequate as the words were. This is my fault. It's not your fault, Coach said firmly. You didn't place those bets. You didn't open those accounts. You're a victim in this too, even if the media doesn't see it that way yet. But I need you to understand something. This team, this organization, we're going to move forward. And when we do, I want you with us. But you've got to get your house in order first. Handle the legal stuff. Handle your personal life. And then come back ready to prove you're still the player we drafted. You really think I'll still have a spot? I'm fighting for you, Coach said. But I can only do so much. The front office is nervous. The sponsors are nervous. You're going to have to earn back trust, and that's going to take time. Maybe a lot of time. You prepared for that? I don't have a choice, I said. Basketball's all I know. Then fight for it, Coach said. Because nobody's going to hand it back to you. He hung up, and I sat there processing. The season was over. My team had lost without me. And my future in the league was uncertain at best. Everything I'd worked for since I was a kid, all the hours in the gym, all the sacrifices, it was all hanging by a thread because of decisions other people made. But I wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, negotiations, and endless media scrutiny. The FBI formally offered me immunity in exchange for full cooperation and testimony against Rich Carver. I took it. I spent hours in that same conference room, going through every detail of my relationship with Rich, every conversation, every transaction I could remember. They recorded it all, built their case, prepared for trial. Rich was arrested trying to flee the country. They caught him at a private airfield with a bag full of cash and fake passports. The news played the footage on loop. Rich in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face twisted in anger as they led him to a police car. The man who'd promised to take care of me, who'd sat at my mother's table and sworn he had my best interests at heart, was now a fugitive caught running. Melissa pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years with the possibility of parole after 2. She'd give birth in a regular hospital, have a few days with the baby under supervision, and then be transferred to a minimum security facility. The judge was lenient because she cooperated fully and showed genuine remorse. Or maybe because she was pregnant, and the optics of sending an expectant mother to prison were bad enough without adding excessive sentencing to the mix. My settlement with the FBI was finalized, $7.2 million in restitution. They'd seized what they could from Rich's accounts, but most of the money was gone, spent or hidden in places they couldn't track. So it fell on me to make up the difference. My lawyers negotiated a payment plan, but it still meant selling my apartment, liquidating investments, downsizing my entire life. The team offered me a new contract, minimum salary, non-guaranteed, basically a prove-it deal. Take it or leave it. I took it. I had no leverage, no other options. Teams around the league saw me as toxic, a liability. The fact that my own team was willing to give me a chance at all was more than I deserved, or so the media kept telling me. I moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment across town. Nothing fancy, no views, no doorman, just a basic place where I could focus on basketball and prepare for fatherhood. The contrast to my old life was stark. I'd gone from penthouse to ordinary in a matter of weeks, but honestly, it felt like a relief. The penthouse had always been about image, about showing the world I'd made it. This place was just functional, a place to sleep, to work out, to live. Marcus helped me move in. We didn't talk much, just carried boxes and assembled furniture. When we finished, he cracked open 2 beers and we sat on the balcony, which was barely big enough for 2 chairs, but had a decent view of the parking lot. You doing okay? He asked. Define okay, I said. I'm broke, suspended, about to be a single father, and my reputation is destroyed. But I'm not in jail and I can still play basketball. So, yeah, I guess I'm okay. The guys are asking about you, Marcus said, wondering when you'll be back at practice. Coach said suspension's lifted once the trial's over. Rich's trial starts next month. If I testify like I'm supposed to and everything goes smoothly, maybe I'll be back by Christmas. Good, Marcus said. We need you. New guys they signed can't shoot for shit. I laughed. The first real laugh I'd had in weeks. It felt good, like maybe I was still human under all the trauma and stress. You ready to be a dad? Marcus asked. Hell no, I said honestly. I don't know the first thing about babies. I've been reading books, watching videos, but it all feels theoretical. Like I'm studying for a test I can't possibly pass. Nobody's ready, Marcus said. My sister has 3 kids and she says every single one surprised her. You just figure it out as you go. That's not comforting. Wasn't meant to be comforting. Was meant to be honest. We sat in silence for a while, drinking our beers, watching the sun set behind the buildings. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not optimism. Just a quiet acceptance that this was my life now, and I had to find a way to live it. Melissa gave birth on a cold morning in early December. Her lawyer called me from the hospital. A healthy baby girl, 6 pounds 9 ounces, perfect in every way. They were keeping Melissa under supervision but allowing me to visit before she was transferred to the facility. I drove to the hospital with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I'd bought baby supplies, set up a nursery in the second bedroom, read every parenting book I could find. But none of it prepared me for walking into that hospital room and seeing my daughter for the first time. Melissa was in bed, pale and exhausted, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in pink blankets. A guard stood by the door, a reminder that this wasn't a normal birth, wasn't a joyful family moment. It was the beginning of a custody transfer, a transaction. "Hey," Melissa said softly when she saw me. "Hey," I said, unable to take my eyes off the baby. "You want to hold her?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Melissa carefully transferred the baby into my arms, and suddenly I was holding my daughter. She was so small, so fragile, with tiny fingers that gripped instinctively at my thumb and eyes that couldn't quite focus yet. She had Melissa's nose and what looked like my chin. She was perfect. Absolutely, impossibly perfect. "Have you thought about names?" Melissa asked. We discussed it briefly through lawyers, agreeing to decide together when the time came. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, running through options, trying to find something that felt right. "What about Grace?" I said. "Grace Hayes." Melissa smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Grace, I love it. It's perfect." Grace, a name that meant elegance, goodness, divine favor. Everything I wanted for this little girl who was born into chaos but deserved so much better. I stayed for an hour, holding Grace, memorizing her face, trying to absorb the reality that I was responsible for this tiny life. Melissa watched us, silent mostly, occasionally offering advice about feeding and sleeping schedules. It should have been strange, this stilted interaction between two people whose lives had been destroyed by their own choices, but in that moment, we weren't those people. We were just two parents trying to do right by their child. When it was time to leave, Melissa kissed Grace's forehead one last time. "I'm so sorry I can't be there," she whispered, "but your daddy's going to take care of you. He's going to give you everything I can't." I wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the pain of what she was about to lose, but I couldn't find the words, so I just nodded and left, carrying Grace out of that hospital room and into our new life. The first few weeks were brutal. Grace cried constantly, barely slept, and I had no idea what I was doing. I called my mother, who flew out to help and basically took over for 2 weeks while teaching me everything I needed to know. She didn't lecture me about the scandal or Melissa or my mistakes. She just showed me how to change diapers, swaddle properly, recognize different types of cries. She was practical and loving, exactly what I needed. When she left, I was on my own. I established routines, figured out feeding schedules, learned to function on 3 hours of broken sleep. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, harder than any playoff game or championship run, but it was also the most important. Rich's trial began 2 weeks after Grace was born. I testified via video link so I wouldn't have to leave her. I told the jury everything, how Rich had gained my trust, how he'd manipulated our conversations, how he'd opened accounts in my name without permission, how he'd destroyed my career and my reputation for profit. Rich sat at the defense table in a cheap suit, his expensive lawyer arguing that I'd known more than I claimed, that I'd profited from the scheme even if I hadn't orchestrated it. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, testimony from co-conspirators, communications that proved Rich had been the mastermind. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Rich was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The judge called it one of the most egregious cases of agent misconduct she'd ever seen, a betrayal of trust that damaged not just one athlete, but the integrity of professional sports. Rich showed no remorse. He looked straight at the camera during sentencing and smirked, like this was all some kind of joke. When the verdict came down, I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, no closure, just emptiness. Rich going to prison didn't give me back the years of my career he'd stolen. It didn't restore my reputation or return the money he'd taken. It was just accountability, which was better than nothing but not nearly enough. My suspension was officially lifted the day after Rich's sentencing. Coach called personally. "You're back on the roster. Practice starts Monday. You ready?" I looked at Grace sleeping in her bassinet, tiny and peaceful. I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. I thought about the long road ahead, rebuilding my career while raising a daughter alone, proving to everyone that I was worth another chance. "Yeah," I said, "I'm ready." Monday morning, I dropped Grace off at daycare, my stomach in knots the entire time. Leaving her felt wrong, even though I knew she'd be safe, even though I'd vetted the place thoroughly. But I had to work, had to play, had to start putting my life back together. Walking into the practice facility felt surreal. The same hallways, the same locker room, but everything was different now. I wasn't the star anymore. I was the cautionary tale. The guy who'd survived a scandal but might never be great again. The team was already on the court when I arrived. They stopped playing when they saw me, an awkward silence settling over the gym. Then Marcus jogged over, grabbed my hand, pulled me in for a hug. "Welcome back, man." One by one, other teammates came over. Not everyone. Some kept their distance, still uncertain, still protecting themselves. But enough came that I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could belong here again. Coach blew his whistle. "All right, let's get to work. Hayes, you're running with the second unit today. Show me you've still got it." I laced up my shoes and stepped onto the court. The ball felt good in my hands, familiar. Right? I took a shot, watched it arc through the air and swish through the net. The sound echoed in the gym, sweet and pure. For the first time in months, I smiled. This was just the beginning. I had so much to prove, so much to rebuild. But I was here. I was fighting. And I wasn't going to let the past define my future. Not when I had Grace waiting for me at home. Not when I still had a chance to make this right. The comeback was harder than I thought it would be. Not physically, though that part wasn't easy either. I'd kept myself in shape during the suspension, working out in anonymous gyms at odd hours, running through empty parks before dawn. My body was ready. It was everything else that wasn't. The media attention was relentless. Every game became a referendum on my character. Every shot I took was analyzed not just for skill, but for what it said about my redemption arc. Sports journalists who'd never cared about me before suddenly had opinions about whether I deserved a second chance. Talk radio hosts debated my morality during rush hour commutes. Social media was a cesspool of judgment, half the people calling me a victim and the other half calling me a fraud who'd gotten away with it. I stopped reading it all. Had to. For Grace, for my sanity, for any chance at moving forward. I deleted my social media apps, stopped watching sports shows, avoided newspapers. If I was going to get through this, I had to focus on what I could control. The game, my daughter, nothing else. The first few games back, I came off the bench. 12 minutes a game, playing with the second unit, trying to prove I could still contribute. I wasn't the star anymore. That role belonged to the young guys who'd stepped up during my absence, the ones who hadn't brought scandal to the organization. I was just a role player now, someone fighting for minutes, for relevance, for a future in the league. But I could live with that. Because every night after practice, I'd come home to Grace. I'd scoop her up from daycare, smell that baby smell that somehow made everything else fade away, and remember what actually mattered. She didn't care about my stats or my reputation. She just wanted her dad to hold her, feed her, read to her before bed. That was enough. That had to be enough. 3 months into my return, we were on a road trip in Chicago when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Mr. Hayes?" A woman's voice, professional but warm. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name is Jennifer Okafor. I'm a producer with ESPN. I'm working on a documentary about the sports betting scandal and I'd like to interview you." I almost hung up. I'd turned down dozens of interview requests. 60 Minutes, HBO, Netflix, everyone wanted to tell my story. But I'd said no to all of them because I didn't want to relitigate the worst period of my life for public consumption. I didn't want Grace to grow up with a documentary about her parents' mistakes following her around. "I'm not interested," I said. "I understand," Jennifer said, "and I respect your privacy. But I want you to know that we're doing this story with or without you." Richard Carver agreed to an interview from prison. So did several of the people he worked with. Your story is going to be told. The question is whether you want to have a voice in how it's told. That stopped me. Rich was talking. Of course he was. Probably spinning some narrative where he was the victim, where I was complicit, where he'd been set up by the system. I couldn't let that stand unchallenged. What kind of documentary? I asked. Comprehensive, she said. We're looking at how the scandal happened, who was involved, the impact on the sport, but we also want to explore the human side. What it's like to have your life destroyed by someone you trusted. What redemption looks like. How you rebuild from ground zero. And you want me to talk about all that on camera? Only what you're comfortable with, she said. But yes, I think your perspective is important. Not just for the story, but for everyone watching who's ever been betrayed or had to start over. You're not just a basketball player caught in a scandal. You're someone fighting to reclaim your life. That matters. I thought about it for a long time. About Grace watching this documentary someday, hearing her father's side of the story directly instead of through tabloid articles and gossip. About setting the record straight, not for the people who'd already made up their minds, but for the ones willing to listen. I'll do it, I said, but I have conditions. We filmed the interview 3 weeks later at my apartment. Jennifer and a small crew set up in my living room, arranging lights and cameras around the space where Grace's toys were scattered across the floor. I'd insisted on filming at home instead of some neutral location. If people were going to judge me, they could see the reality of my life, the modest apartment, the baby swing in the corner, the life I'd built from the wreckage. Jennifer sat across from me, notes on her lap, a kind expression on her face. The cameras rolled and she started with the obvious question. Take me back to that night at the arena. What was going through your mind when you saw Melissa in the crowd? I told her everything. The shock of seeing her pregnant, the confusion when the FBI arrived, the moment when my entire world fractured in front of 20,000 people. I didn't hold back, didn't try to make myself look better or downplay the pain. I just told the truth. Did you have any idea what Richard Carver was doing? She asked. None, I said. And that's the part that haunts me. I should have known. I should have paid more attention to my finances, asked more questions, been less trusting. But I was focused on basketball. Rich told me he'd handle the business side and I believed him. That was my mistake. Do you think you were naive? Absolutely. I was 21 when I met Rich. I'd never had money before, never dealt with contracts or investments or any of it. He positioned himself as a mentor, someone who'd protect me. And I bought it completely. I wanted to believe that someone had my back, that I could trust him. That naivety cost me everything. What about Melissa? That question was harder. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I loved her. I thought we had something real. Finding out she was working with Rich, that she'd been using our relationship to gather information, that destroyed me in a different way than the money or the scandal. It made me question everything about my judgment, my ability to see people clearly. You're raising her daughter. Your daughter. How do you reconcile that? Grace didn't choose any of this, I said. She's innocent. And yeah, every time I look at her, I see Melissa. But I also see possibility. A chance to do something right, to be the parent she deserves even if her mother can't be there right now. Jennifer leaned forward. There are people who think you got away with something, that you had to know more than you're admitting. What do you say to them? I say I understand why they think that, I said, meeting her eyes. It sounds convenient, right? That I just happened to be completely oblivious while millions of dollars moved through accounts in my name. But it's the truth. The FBI investigated me for months. They went through every transaction, every communication, everything. And they found nothing that suggested I knew, because I didn't. I was used, and I'm paying for that mistake, even if I didn't commit the crime. How are you paying for it? $7.2 million in restitution, I said, which basically wiped out my savings. I'm on a minimum contract now, living in a 2-bedroom apartment instead of a penthouse. Starting over from scratch at 30 years old with a baby and a destroyed reputation. Is that enough punishment for being naive and trusting the wrong people? I don't know, but it's what I've got. We talked for 3 hours. About Rich's trial, about Melissa's sentencing, about the first time I held Grace, about trying to rebuild my career while learning to be a father. Jennifer asked hard questions, but she listened too, really listened, in a way that made me feel like maybe this documentary could be something more than just exploitation. When we finished, she thanked me and promised she'd send me a rough cut before it aired. I appreciated that. Some control over how my story was told, even if I couldn't control how people received it. The documentary aired 6 months later. It was called The Price of Trust, and it was fair, which was more than I'd expected. They showed Rich's crimes in detail, Melissa's involvement, the impact on the league. But they also showed my perspective, my fight to rebuild, my relationship with Grace. The final scene was footage of me at a game, Grace in the stands with my mother watching me play. The narrator talked about redemption, about second chances, about the long road to rebuilding a life. The reaction was mixed. Some people said it humanized me, made them understand what I'd been through. Others said I was playing victim, using my daughter for sympathy. Sports shows debated it for weeks. Was I reformed or just a good storyteller? Did I deserve the platform or should I have stayed silent? But something shifted. Not with everyone, but with enough people. Fans started showing up to games with signs that said, "We believe you," and "Grace's dad." Letters arrived at the practice facility, people sharing their own stories of betrayal and starting over. I started getting calls from sponsorship companies again, small ones testing the waters to see if I was marketable. More importantly, my teammates started treating me differently. Not like the scandal guy, but like a teammate who'd been through hell and survived. Marcus had always been there, but now others opened up too. Shared meals on the road, invited me to team events, included Grace in family gatherings. Slowly, painfully slowly, I was becoming part of the team again, instead of the outsider they were forced to tolerate. Coach started giving me more minutes. 20 a game became 25, became 30. I wasn't starting yet, but I was important to the rotation. My shot was falling again. My defense was sharp, and I was playing with a hunger I hadn't felt in years, because I had something to prove now. Not to the critics or the doubters, but to myself. That I could still be great. That the scandal hadn't taken that from me. We made the playoffs that year. A 6 seed, not favorites for anything, just happy to be there. Our first round opponent was the 3 seed, a veteran team that had knocked us out the year before. We weren't supposed to win, but we fought, took them to 7 games, and in Game 7, with 2 minutes left and the score tied, Coach called a play for me. I hadn't taken a last-second shot since before the scandal, since the night Melissa showed up and everything fell apart. But Coach looked at me and said, "This is your moment. Take it." I caught the ball at the top of the key with 15 seconds left. The arena was screaming. My defender was playing tight, expecting the drive. I sized him up, thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal, the trial, the nights alone with Grace wondering if I'd ever feel whole again, the long climb back to relevance. 10 seconds. I dribbled right, crossed over, created just enough space. 8 seconds. I rose up, the ball leaving my hands in a perfect arc. 6 seconds. The world went silent. 4 seconds. The ball hit the rim, bounced once, twice, 2 seconds, and dropped through. The arena erupted. My teammates mobbed me. Marcus was screaming in my face, pure joy. Coach pumped his fist. And somewhere in the stands, my mother was holding Grace, who was too young to understand, but would see this moment on video someday and know that her dad had fought back. We advanced to the second round, lost in 5 games, but we competed. We weren't embarrassed, and I averaged 23 points in those playoff games, proving that I could still play at a high level when it mattered most. That summer, the team offered me a real contract. 3 years, mid-level money, a vote of confidence that I was worth investing in. I signed it and felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Security. Not wealth. I wasn't getting wealthy anymore. But stability. A chance to build something lasting. Grace turned 2. She was talking now, stringing together sentences, calling me Dada with a smile that melted my heart every single time. I threw her a birthday party at my apartment. Just family and a few close friends. Marcus brought his kids and they all played together, Grace laughing and running around with frosting on her face. My mother pulled me aside at one point. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not because you're playing basketball again, because of the man you've become, the father you've become. That's the real comeback." I hugged her, feeling tears I'd been holding back for months. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," she said. "You're stronger than you think." "Always have been." A week later, I got a letter from Melissa. It was the first time I'd heard from her directly since Grace's birth. The letter was short, written in careful handwriting on prison stationery. "I saw the documentary. I saw you with Grace at your games. I saw the life you're building for her. Thank you for being the parent I can't be right now. Thank you for not letting my mistakes ruin her chance at happiness. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. But I want you to know that seeing you succeed, seeing Grace thrive, it's the only thing that makes the time in here bearable. You're doing an amazing job. She's lucky to have you. I'll be out in 6 months. I don't know what our relationship will look like then, but I hope we can figure out how to co-parent for her sake. She deserves both of us trying. Take care of her. Take care of yourself. You've earned every good thing coming your way." I read that letter 3 times, trying to process the emotions it stirred up. Anger, because her choices had created this mess. Sadness, because Grace was growing up without her mother. but also something like forgiveness, or at least understanding. Melissa had made terrible decisions, but she was paying for them. And she was right about one thing. Grace deserved both of us trying. I wrote back. Not a long letter, just a few lines letting her know that Grace was doing great, that we'd figure out the co-parenting situation when she got out, that I wouldn't stand in the way of her being a mother if she could prove she'd changed. It felt like closure, or at least a step toward it. The next season, I finally earned my starting spot back. Not because of politics or sympathy, but because I'd proven I was the best option. My stats climbed back toward my pre-scandal numbers. Not quite there yet, but close enough to show I still had plenty left in the tank. More importantly, I'd found balance. Basketball was still important, still something I loved and needed. But it wasn't everything anymore. Grace was everything. Coming home to her after a tough loss mattered more than any game. Reading her bedtime stories mattered more than any highlight. Being present for her first day of preschool mattered more than any contract negotiation. I'd lost almost everything. My money, my reputation, my trust in people, years of my career. But I'd gained something too. Perspective, priorities, purpose beyond just being great at putting a ball through a hoop. I was a father now. That identity mattered more than any other. 3 years after the scandal broke, ESPN did a follow-up piece on where everyone ended up. Rich was still in prison, serving his sentence, unrepentant and claiming he'd been railroaded. Melissa had been released on good behavior and was working at a nonprofit while rebuilding her relationship with Grace. It was slow, awkward, supervised visits that gradually became longer as she proved herself stable. Grace seemed happy to have her mother back, even if she didn't fully understand where Melissa had been. And me? I was still playing, still fighting, still proving every night that I belonged. The scandal would always be part of my story. There was no erasing it, no pretending it didn't happen. But it wasn't the whole story anymore. It was a chapter. A painful, devastating chapter that taught me who I was when everything was stripped away. The night the follow-up aired, I was putting Grace to bed. She was 4 now, bright and curious and completely unaware of the cameras and documentaries and judgment that swirled around her existence. She just knew that her daddy played basketball and her mommy was trying hard and she was loved. "Dada," she said as I tucked her in. "Tell me a story." "What kind of story?" I asked. "A story about being brave." I thought about it. About the night in the arena. About the FBI interrogation. About holding her for the first time while her mother went to prison. About the first game back. The hostile crowds. The slow climb to acceptance. About every moment when giving up would have been easier, but I chose to keep fighting. "Once upon a time," I said, "there was a man who made mistakes. He trusted the wrong people and his whole life fell apart. He lost almost everything that mattered to him. But then he got a second chance. Not because he deserved it, but because someone believed he could do better. So he worked harder than he'd ever worked before. He learned who his real friends were. And most importantly, he learned that being brave isn't about never being scared. It's about being scared and showing up anyway." "What happened to the man?" Grace asked, her eyes heavy with sleep. "He's still figuring it out," I said honestly. "But he's got someone pretty special who makes him want to keep trying. Someone who gives him a reason to be brave every single day." "Who?" I kissed her forehead. "You, sweetheart. You." She smiled, already drifting off. I sat there for a while, watching her sleep, feeling the weight of everything that had happened and everything still to come. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more setbacks, more moments when I'd question whether I was doing any of this right. But I had Grace. I had basketball. I had a story that wasn't just about falling, but about getting back up. About the price of trust and the cost of redemption and the long, difficult road to becoming the person you're meant to be. I walked out to the living room and looked at my reflection in the window. Not the penthouse view of my old life, just a simple apartment in a quiet neighborhood. But it was home. Real home. Built on truth instead of lies, on love instead of image, on purpose instead of ego. My phone buzzed. A text from Coach. "Practice tomorrow at 9. Don't be late. We've got work to do." I smiled. Work to do. Games to win. A daughter to raise. A life to live. Not the life I'd planned. Not the story I'd imagined when I first made it to the league. But it was mine. Hard-earned, battle-tested, real. And that was enough. More than enough. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, ready for whatever came next, because I'd already survived the worst. Everything after this was just basketball, and basketball I knew how to do.